show that is the sworn and mortal enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Well, tonight, ISIS is praising the student who plowed into people with a car yesterday and slashed victims at Ohio State University. They're calling him a soldier of the Islamic State. The horrifying attack could have been much worse and would have been if it weren't for the fast response of an Ohio State University police officer, pictured there on the screen. He shot the killer dead within minutes. That officer is being praised tonight as a hero, of course, but not everyone on the activist left is impressed by what he did. Some have imputed racial motives to the shooting. Among those is radio show host and author Tariq Nasheed. He tweeted this yesterday. So white officer Alan Harukjo shot and killed the black Somali stabbing suspect in Ohio and is being paraded as a hero. That's interesting. Well, Tariq joins us now to explain. Tariq, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Tucker.
Oh, of course. This struck me when I read it as a pretty cowardly thing for you to say for a bunch of reasons, but mostly because it's so imprecise. Okay. You don't spell out what you mean. You say that that's interesting. Why is that interesting? Would it have been better if this guy, the murderer, had continued to hack people with a butcher knife? Is that what you're saying? What are you saying?
No, I'm saying, Tucker, what's cowardly is to make up a false narrative that I didn't say or even imply by saying that I was not impressed or I was dissatisfied with the police's work. And basically, that tweet was very vague. It was very neutral. It was basically a statement. It wasn't even my opinion. So for you to start off the segment saying that it was cowardly, that's disingenuous.
Look, I'm having you on, Tariq, to explain yourself, and I'm asking you, what did you mean by that? Is the guy,
and I'll be glad to do that.
Who shot this guy a hero, or isn't he?
I'll be glad to answer that, but I don't want to do the false narrative thing because that's just very disingenuous, and I like to bring truth
just
to
answer
power.
The question.
Now, let me explain what I meant. Yeah. Okay. No, I didn't think that the guy was wrong for what he did. The guy was a hero. The comment wasn't meant to racialize the actual shooting in the event itself. When that happened online, there were a lot of people who played the race card, and the minute they found out who the suspect was, they kept talking about black Somalian, then they started talking about Black Lives Matter, then they started talking about Obama, then they racialized it. So that's normal.
I'm sorry. Okay. There's only so much I can take. I spent all afternoon listening to your podcast, which is the most racialized thing I think I've ever listened to in my life. And not
which is not true. Which is not true.
Let me say this. You sent a series of tweets here noting the race and the nationality of the terrorist, and you also put quotes around the word terrorist. If you drive your car through a crowd of people and murder someone with a knife, are you not a terrorist? Why did you put quotes around?
I didn't say that the man. I didn't say that the man wasn't a terrorist. Tucker, are you going to say anything honest before we get the interview started, or it's just going to be a bunch of projections of your suspected white supremacist views
around the word terrorist? Okay.
Because I didn't know if the guy was a terrorist or not. I didn't know if he was a suspect. I didn't know if that was the only suspect. So I didn't have all the facts. I wanted to wait for all the facts to come in before I label people, which is what you should do.
Okay. If someone drives his car through a crowd of people, here's what we knew from the first moment this happened. A guy drove his car through a crowd of people, intentionally hitting them, and then he attacked one of them with a knife. What else do you need to know in order to conclude that man is committing an act of terrorism? What's the missing piece there for you?
We didn't get all the facts initially because initially they said that there were other suspects. So I didn't have all the facts in. So I wasn't in the position to label anybody or bring my opinion to the table. I wanted to wait to see what all the facts were before I labeled people. And that's what you should do,
No,
Tucker.
you didn't. What you were trying to do is incite race hatred, which is what you do for a living, making this about race from the very start, when in fact race played no role. Now, you make the claim repeatedly in your writings and on your show that this is a, quote, white supremacist country. The guy who did this was imported here at taxpayer expense from Somalia. He was living, I believe, entirely on taxpayer expense. It was government-subsidized education at Ohio State. Why would a white supremacist country import Africans in large numbers and then pay for them to live here? I don't understand. It doesn't, speaking of narratives, doesn't really fit your narrative, does it?
So we don't live in a system of complete white supremacy? Everybody's lying, Tucker?
Huh. So the overwhelming majority of immigrants to this country are non-white. Why would a white supremacist country import massive numbers of non-white immigrants? Not to blow your mind,
when you say non-white, I mean, there's Hispanic people who you say are non-white, but they're labeled as white. There are a lot of people who are classified as white that you say are non-white. So you play this racialized game. So who's non-white and who's white?
Okay, look, I guess the point I'm making is that it's not 1955. It's a totally different country from the one you seem to be addressing on Twitter and in your podcast.
Then
answer this.
How's it different, sir?
In your tweet, it's different in this way. It is an entirely multi-ethnic country. It's not just black people and white people, one oppressing the other. It's a much more complicated landscape, as you may have noticed if you go outside. And so when you tweet out that this is a story of a white man killing a black man, that is misleading. That's not at all what happened. There was no racial motive that we know of here, and you're implying there was. I
didn't say there was a racial motive.
Because it serves your financial... Well, of course you did. You said the white officer shot a black Somali suspect.
Tucker. This is Fox News. You guys are the race casino. Forget about the race card. You play the race casino. Right. So it's very hypocritical for me to specify the race of a suspect and a police officer, and that is supposed to be some kind of problem when you guys do it all the time and arbitrarily blame black people for everything negative in this country.
Here, I'm not even going to rise to the bait. Let me just say that I think when normal people, and I'm excluding you from that category, watched what happened yesterday, they didn't see the race of the terrorist or the race of the cop. They saw an American stopping a lunatic from murdering more people on a college campus.
So why did your white supremacist colleagues make it racial? So why did they make it racial? Why did so many people
I'm afraid,
the right? And how did they make it racial?
I don't know one person on any network who looked at this and said, here you have a white man killing a black man. They said, here you have a police officer, representative of
they said black
stopping a mass murder from continuing.
So was it Black Lives Matter fault? You guys always seem to blame Black Lives Matter, and Black Lives Matter is any black person you choose to make Black Lives Matter. So
right, okay, I'm missing the thread of your argument, but I think you've made your
you're
own
not
point.
missing it.
Yeah,
you got it.
I'm not.
You're a smart guy. Suspected white supremacists are very smart, so you got it.
Right. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. Well, and today, ISIS, through its news agency, and yes, it does have one, claimed responsibility for that rampage we've just been talking about at Ohio State. That is, investigators are looking into evidence of the shooter's growing Islamic fervor on social media. Correspondent Mike Tobin is in Columbus, Ohio, with the very latest on that tonight. Mike?
And Tucker, investigators tell Fox News that Abdul Ali Artan was indeed a consumer of ISIS propaganda, and there are more and more indications that he's self-radicalized. He ranted online about the treatment of Muslims. He referenced a boiling point, lone wolf attacks, and threatened sleeper cells. He praised as a hero Anwar Awlaki, the U.S.-born cleric killed by a drone strike, now a symbol for online jihad wannabes. The attack happened at a time when Homeland Security was warning about homegrown attacks.
There are a couple of things, though, that we know. The first is that there is plenty of available evidence to indicate that this individual may have been motivated by extremism and may have been motivated by a desire to carry out an act of terrorism.
Most of the attack victims have now been discharged from the hospital. None of their injuries are considered life-threatening. For the first time, we heard from one of the victims.
It happened so fast. I turned to go back in the building. All of a sudden, this bang and this car's there, and I get flipped in the air. And it all happens so fast. I mean, say literally, at least it seemed to me. Maybe the time frame is a little compressed, but it seemed to me literally within 15 to 30 seconds, I heard the shots, and it was over.
Artan was a good student, cum laude with an associate's degree from the community college. He had just transferred to OSU. He had no history of disciplinary problems. The people in his neighborhood said he was a good kid from a big family. None of them saw this coming. Tucker?
Thanks a lot, Mike. Appreciate it. We'll continue to monitor developments in this story, which is interesting. The more we know, the more interesting it is. We're going to turn now, though, to the Trump transition, which is also underway. President-elect Trump made some big cabinet decisions today, big ones. And tonight, the president-elect is having dinner with Mitt Romney, the former governor of Massachusetts. Is it a celebratory meal or a consolation prize for the governor? Correspondent Peter Ducey is braving the cold outside Trump Tower in Manhattan with the very latest. Hey, Peter.
And Tucker, I'm just as curious to hear who's actually going to pick up the check, Mr. Romney or Mr. Trump. But their dinner comes just a little while after word came out that tomorrow we are expecting a Trump transition team nomination announcement. That would be for Treasury Secretary. Stephen Mnuchin is expected to be the nominee. He has a lot of experience on Wall Street, a lot of experience in Hollywood, but none in government. As for that dinner, though, that is the big story tonight. We understand that the motorcade is loading up and they are on their way somewhere off campus. It is rare to see the president-elect leave Trump Tower during the transition while he's in town, so we are waiting for word about where they're going and what they're eating, hopefully during your show in the next couple of minutes. But the dinner also comes after a morning that we learned something pretty extraordinary. We learned that the from the transition team communications director, Jason Miller, that Trump knew his advisor, Kellyanne Conway, was going to hit this weekend's Sunday shows and express a very antagonistic series of opinions about Romney, and he did not try to stop her. Earlier today, we did also see another Secretary of State contender, Bob Corker, visit Trump Tower. He was an early Trump supporter, and he said this on his way out.
So, again, I'm here. There are discussions underway about other things. Again, this is a decision that he needs to make. The Secretary of State's role is so important to a president. He needs to choose someone that he's very comfortable with, that he knows there's going to be no daylight between him and them.
And somebody who's been much more vocal with his desire to become the Secretary of State is Rudy Giuliani, who has said recently he thinks he knows more about foreign affairs than anybody else the Trump team is talking to. He was not seen today, despite speculation he was going to be around. And when transition officials were asked where the mayor was, they just said they didn't know what the mayor's schedule looked like. Today we did see nominations as well for HHS, that would be Congressman Tom Price, and Transportation, former Labor Secretary Elaine Chao got that nod. And we heard that Senator Jeff Sessions, the AG in waiting, is probably going to be able to get started right around the time that Trump takes his hand off the Bible, because his confirmation hearing is going to happen before the swearing in. Tucker?
Interesting. Good news. Thanks a lot, Peter. Appreciate it. Ooh, you see the storm clouds gathering. That means it's time for Twitter Storm, our nightly forecast of social media's most intense weather patterns. Well, the eye of tonight's storm is hovering over singer John Legend, who it turns out is not simply a recording artist, but an incisive political commentator as well. In a recent interview, Legend waxed poetic about the Obama administration, noting that Americans are, quote, appreciating how scandal-free his presidency has been. He went on to praise Obama for lowering unemployment and increasing incomes, presumably not just in Los Angeles. Twitter, of course, disagrees with a lot of that. Carla wrote this, quote, scandal count for your information, IRS targeting, Fast and Furious, executive actions, Benghazi, Iran deal, lying about knowledge of the server. Presumably, if she had more characters, she could go on. Of course she could. Major Lag wrote this, I love when rich people talk about my financial status as if they have any friggin' clue about how the middle class live. And finally this, Stony Magnolia wrote, whatever celebrities are thinking, think the opposite. A handy rule of thumb. Write that on your hand. And that is tonight's Twitter Storm. Up next, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky on who ought to be Secretary of State and why. And should burning the American flag be a crime? President-elect Trump says it should be. We'll talk to someone who said not only should the flag burning be legal, it ought to be encouraged. Prepare your stack of beer cans to throw at the television set. That's next. As the Trump transition team works into the night, the next Secretary of State, which is among the most powerful cabinet roles, has not yet been chosen. The top three contenders appear to be Mitt Romney, Rudy Giuliani, and former General David Petraeus. Tonight, as we've noted, President-elect Trump is dining with Romney, Kentucky Senator and former presidential candidate and Trump rival. Rand Paul has been thinking a lot about who ought to get that job, and he joins us now. Senator, it's great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So here are some of the names that have been floated. We just named them. In addition to Romney, you had former Mayor Giuliani. You also had John Bolton. Would you be happy with any of those three?
You know, I think it's important that we, or President-elect Trump, nominate somebody who agrees with Donald Trump. Donald Trump spent a lot of time traveling the country saying the Iraq War was a mistake, that nation building hasn't worked or made us safer, it's very expensive, and that regime change has led to unintended consequences. That's exactly where I am. That's why I like Donald Trump, is that I think he recognizes Iraq War was a mistake and some of the problems. So he should appoint somebody that recognizes that. I think both Giuliani and Bolton, I would call them unrepentant advocates of the Iraq War. They haven't learned any of the lessons of the Middle East, so I don't think they would represent Donald Trump very well because they don't agree with Donald Trump's positions on the Middle East.
What about Mitt Romney?
I don't know as much, but I know he's been fairly hardcore about supporting the Iraq War, and I haven't heard anything from Romney saying, well, he's skeptical or thinking that we should learn some lessons from that. But another reason why I think this position is very important is Donald Trump also says he wants to build our nation here at home. Infrastructure. Right. You can't do nation building abroad and at home. We don't have enough money for that. So I think really you need a Secretary of State who believes nation building's too expensive overseas. You know, we put $100 billion into infrastructure in Afghanistan. We don't have the money to do that and build our roads and bridges here at home. So your Secretary of State needs to agree with Donald Trump on nation building in order to have enough money left over for domestic policy as well.
Has there ever been a Secretary of State in American history, though, who felt that way? I mean, is it one of those jobs where your views conform to the job and you find yourself identifying maybe a lot more with the concerns of other countries than you thought you would?
Well, no, I think you want somebody who, one, does generally agree with the worldview of the president. So I think Donald Trump's worldview has been Iraq war was a mistake, nation building doesn't work, regime change doesn't work. They may not agree completely, so you may not get a perfect clone of Donald Trump, but I think in order for Donald Trump's vision to be part of the State Department, he should appoint somebody who actually agrees with Donald Trump.
You keep saying he believed that Iraq war was a mistake, and yet we heard from the press for a year and a half that he was every bit as implicated in the Iraq war as Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, you know, sometimes the press completely gets it wrong, and this was a time where every night at home I'd be throwing things on my TV saying, why don't they get it? They kept going back to some interview, you know, on Howard Stern from 10, 15 years ago, and it's like, the point isn't exactly when he understood it, it's that he understands it now.
Right.
Hillary Clinton never understood it. Hillary Clinton continued to be she said she changed her mind on the war, but she continued to be for regime change in Libya. She continued to be for regime change in Syria. Hillary Clinton never learned the lesson of the Iraq war is that sometimes you change a regime. For example, when we got rid of Saddam Hussein, Iran became stronger. Iran is more of a menace now than they were when Saddam Hussein was a counterbalance. So that was an example of regime change destabilizing a region and making us less safe. We got rid of Gaddafi, same thing in Libya. Hillary Clinton never understood that. Donald Trump did. That was a big difference, and yet the media quibbled about when he became opposed to the Iraq war, which wasn't so important as did he understand the lesson of the Iraq war.
So you're saying that whoever takes this job needs to understand the lesson of the last 15 years of American foreign policy, but I wonder, does the Republican establishment in Washington understand it? So we're going to see who's chosen Secretary of State, but he'll have a massive staff beneath him, most of them Republicans from D.C., the foreign policy establishment. Right. Have they internalized the lessons?
Well, the interesting thing is his pick for National Security Advisor, General Flynn, has said that the historical lesson is that the Iraq war was a strategic failure. So there are people, even from the military, there were many people, you know, in Hillary Clinton's book, many of the generals, other than Petraeus, but many of the generals were saying, you know, regime change isn't going to work in Syria. We're taking our eye off of ISIS because we're getting too involved with trying to replace Assad. Petraeus sided with Clinton, of course, so I don't think he really gets the lesson either. But if you look at Hillary Clinton's book about it, she was all for regime change. You know, we got to get rid of Assad. So was Petraeus. But many of the other generals in the region at the time were actually opposed to regime change.
So if you were to boil down the purpose of America's foreign policy to a refrigerator magnet you would give to Donald Trump to look at every morning as he pulled his orange juice out of the fridge, what would it say?
Defend America.
Defend America.
Yeah, and so the thing is there also is a difference between the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State. Secretary of Defense has to have us prepared. We have to have the strongest, mightiest military that says don't ever mess with us. But the Secretary of State needs to be a diplomat that tries to look for solutions other than war.
Right.
So, for example, if I were contrasting John Bolton with anybody else on the planet, I would say almost everybody else on the planet is more likely to advocate for war being the last resort, where I would worry that John Bolton would advocate for war being the first resort.
So it's John Bolton versus, as you put it, everyone else on the planet.
Everyone else on the planet.
That does not sound like a ringing endorsement.
Everyone else on the planet comes in ahead of John Bolton.
Okay. Senator Rand Paul headed off to dinner with John Bolton. Great to see you.
Thanks.
And here's something new, the latest technological gadget you absolutely have to have for reasons no one can really explain to you. It's here. Get your credit card ready. Here it is. Snapchat has released a pair of so-called smart sunglasses. They're called spectacles, a word we've heard before. They allow users to record short point-of-view videos and post them to the Snapchat app that allows you to live a life that is entirely on video. The glasses will set you back $129 if you're able to get your hands on a pair. It turns out in order to generate consumer hysteria with an artificial shortage, they are being sold only at vending machines called snap bots. They appear at random locations across the country. There is one brick and mortar store. It's a pop-up store in New York City, and it's open only until New Year's Eve. So just in case you weren't spending enough of your time sending contrived images of your life to people you barely know on social media, or blowing enough money on Chinese-made devices certain to become obsolete a year from now, you've got a new option. Congratulations to you. And according to the Supreme Court, burning the American flag is covered under the First Amendment. It's legal, but few people do it because it's horrible. My next guest says more people should do it. We'll report, and you can decide. Is there anything more infuriating than watching some entitled ahistorical loser burn the American flag? For many people, there isn't anything more infuriating than that, and that group would include President-elect Donald Trump, who apparently, after watching a segment this morning on Fox and Friends about flag burning, tweeted this, quote, "Nobody should be allowed to burn the American flag. If they do, there must be consequences, perhaps loss of citizenship or a year in jail." Well, while it's legally permitted to burn the flag, there are relatively few people who do it, and there are fewer still who encourage it. And yet there are some. Joining us now is Mark Perkel of flagburning.org. Mark, I always try to take guests seriously. It's hard to take this seriously, but I want to ask you a straightforward first question, which is, why would you burn the American flag?
Well, one would burn the American flag in a situation where the government has gone so far awry that the only way to really protest it is to assert our rights as a citizen to go ahead and burn the flag and be that offensive, because what's happening in America is that offensive. And there are situations that justify burning the American flag, and we have the right to do so. And you know, it's one of those things that you don't take lightly, and it's an important issue, but it's something that we as citizens need to be able to assert our rights, you know, since our rights.
So you've said 3 times you have a right to do it, and no one's contesting that. The Supreme Court has ruled on that. But you've also got a right to scream obscenities at old ladies, and you don't because you're a decent person, one presumes. You're not a decent person if you burn the American flag, and here's why: because it doesn't just represent the government; it represents the sacrifice, the deaths of many thousands of Americans who literally, not just a talking point, literally died for it, and you insult their memory when you do that. So why?
Right. Yeah. So there's no constitutional requirement that a person has to be a decent person. The real issue here is that Donald Trump is announcing that he wants to take away our rights to burn the flag. And the thing is, the United States is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and that means the people are dominant over government. So as long as we can burn the flag, then we, the people, assert our dominance over the government. If the government can take away our right to burn the flag, then the government has dominance over the people, and that's not the way the United States was made.
Really? Because, I mean, I sort of buy a lot of what you're saying. I do think that we ought to resist government's encroachments into our lives. But, you know, where were you when they started telling you how many gallons you can have in your toilet tank? Or when the Obama administration started spying on people's emails, breaking into your Gmail? I don't remember you jumping up and down. I don't think that you're a man of principle. I think you're a malcontent who enjoys infuriating decent people, is what I think.
Oh, well, hey, you haven't looked at my record. You know, when Obama started the NSA, when Obama started the NSA spying, you know, there was somebody who got Nancy Pelosi booed at Netflix Nation, and that person was me. You know, and that was an event that was worth burning the flag over. I didn't burn the flag that day, but if somebody had burned the flag over that, they would have been well justified to do so. The government has no business spying on the people of the United States.
Well, I'm with you there. But, Mark, look, when you look at the picture of the second flag raising at Iwo Jima, which is, I mean, it's an actual event that happened, and thousands of Marines died there, and many of them felt they were dying for that flag, or the raising of the flag over the smoking ruins at 9/11. Do you say to yourself, by desecrating this object, I'm committing symbolic violence against these people, and why would I do something like that? You're not attacking the government, you're attacking your fellow citizens.
No, not at all. You know, the people in Iwo Jima didn't die, you know, for the flag. They died for the right for people like me to burn the flag. They died for our freedom, you know, and freedom means, you know, the people in the United States, you know, can assert, you know, their dominance over government by burning the flag, you know, and yes, it's despicable, and yes, there are despicable people who do that, you know, but this country is a free country, and we have the right to be despicable.
Well, but again, you keep using the word the right. It doesn't mean that you ought to. Again, there are countless things you're allowed to do that you don't do, and by the way, if you want to assert your autonomy as a person, then why not say something interesting or compelling or make an argument that wins people over? You're not doing anything like that. You're doing something, in fact, very banal and ordinary and stupid, burning a flag.
Well, I'm not advocating that people burn the flag, especially right now. I'm actually advocating that people not burn the flag today because Trump wants us to burn the flag in order to create division, in order to create a distraction from the fact that, the Russians rigged the election in his favor, and that we have an incompetent president, and he doesn't want people focusing on the recount. So he brings up the flag burning issue, saying, well, I'm king, and by fiat, I'm going to take away your right to burn the flag in order to try to get people like me to come on and advocate burning the flag. And I'm advocating not burning the flag.
So, Mark, you keep referring to government for the people, by the people, which I think most people, certainly me, would agree with. If the majority of Americans wanted to ban flag burning, and I think probably most do, would you abide by it? I mean, that would be government by the people, for the people. The people's will would be done. So you would stop flag burning if we had a national referendum that banned it.
No, there's certain inalienable rights that are protected by the Constitution, that are so that the individual is protected from the majority. Because, yes, the majority would vote against burning the flag, because it's offensive. But the reason it's, the fact that it's offensive makes it such a sacred part of free speech, to be able to do something offensive is the ultimate, expression of freedom.
Right. That's a childish understanding of freedom, but I've heard it before. But I'm missing your argument here. Are you making an argument that the people rule? I thought that was your argument. And now you're saying a small group of discontents rule. You don't care what the majority thinks. You don't actually care what the majority thinks, the people think. You want to do what you want to do. Which argument are you making?
Well, it's inalienable rights. There are certain things that, are offensive, that our rights are protected, that the majority of people don't want. But because we have inalienable rights, the people have the right to free speech, even if they don't like to hear what people have to say. So, this is an act of free speech, the same way that the Second Amendment is it protects our rights, as the people, to make sure that that in case the government gets too far out of line, we can overthrow the government.
Right. No, I get that, but I don't want to dignify this, which is kind of a stupid argument with too many questions. But let me just ask you this last one: where does that right derive from? Where do you get the right to burn the flag? I know the majority of justices said that, but it's not in the original documents. Does it come from God? Like, you have an inalienable right to burn the American flag. Where do you suppose that right comes from?
I think it comes from the Revolutionary War. That the people rose up and overthrow the King of England. That they pitched the tea into the harbor, and we rose up, and we formed our own nation on the basis of freedom, and that we created this experiment where the United States is a government of the people, not a government of kings, and Donald Trump is trying to turn it back into a kingdom where he can, by fiat, say, well, you lose your citizenship if you burn the flag, and he doesn't even understand, that's not the way laws work in the United States.
What I find so remarkable is the government has more power over your life and my life now than it did 8 years ago by a lot. They're more intrusive. Right. They're making more decisions for me. There are more points during the day where they're telling me what to do at gunpoint, in effect. And you're not saying anything about it. And you're reducing the whole thing
I'm saying a lot about it. I'm saying a lot about it.
Actually, I spent all day on your website. You're just a garden variety liberal who doesn't like Trump because he's a fascist. The Russians stole the election. I mean, think deeply about what you're saying. You might arrive at some useful conclusions.
Well, if you read some of the stuff on my website, Obama's the second worst president ever, and Bush is the worst president ever. And I understand why people voted for Trump, because they were tired of the Democrats, they were tired of Republicans, so they wanted change. And Trump is change you can believe in. I'll guarantee you that things are going to change under Trump. I have no idea what they're going to change into, but there's going to be change happening. And it's probably pretty scary because the man has never held a real job working for somebody else in his life.
Heard this. We're out of time. Let me just end by saying, please don't burn the America. I can't control it, but please don't. It's really offensive to people who really did make real sacrifices. I get your point. We let you come on TV and talk for 5 minutes about it. Don't do that. It's awful. We're out of time.
I agree with you. Do not burn the American flag because Trump wants you to.
That's just stupid. Don't, because tens of thousands of elderly men who risk their lives for your freedom to do that are going to be hurt by it. So just don't do it. Don't be a pig.
Right.
Mark, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Okay. No, that's it. I'm going to end on that. Don't be a pig, Mark. Thanks.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Do you have any idea? Immigration cases clog our federal courts every year. We investigate that next. Plus, your time is running out to send in your mean tweets. We have the cruelest ones, and they're diabolical, basically. So don't miss that. It's the end of the show. Stay tuned. Well, President-elect Trump ran a campaign promising to crack down heavily on illegal immigration, a phenomenon that, among many other things, costs America tens of billions of dollars each year and clogs the federal courts much more than any of us knew. How severe is the problem? Our correspondent, William Lajeunesse, dug up the numbers, actually went to the numbers, unlike anyone else, and joins us now from our West Coast Bureau with his report. William, thanks for coming on. What did you find?
Well, Tucker, you could argue that border security doesn't begin at the border. It starts in Washington, where policy is set. So here is the headline for this story. More than half of all federal prosecutions are immigration related. That's 52% compared to 12% for drugs, 6% for weapons, 4% organized crime, 26% for everything else. So you got 70,000 prosecutions for people illegally entering the U.S., 63,000 for everything else. Whereas just 4 years ago, drugs was number one. You go back to 1992, immigration was just 2% of the caseload, not 52%. Now, 77 or 70,000 sounds like a lot. But remember, the Border Patrol apprehended 400,000 illegals this year, so 20% are being prosecuted. Also, 70,000 is down from 95,000 4 years ago. So we're prosecuting less, not more, over the last 4 years. But this is opposite of the catch and release, which many people would argue is happening to some extent today. Secondly, I spoke to the former U.S. Attorney Pete Nunez for San Diego. He said when an immigrant gets 6 months to 2 years in prison for entering illegally, that sends a message. Secondly, the real value in prosecuting is a single conviction will bar an immigrant from applying to legally enter for 10 years. That is a huge deterrent. But, of course, it's not cheap when it costs $25,000 to put somebody in prison. But none of this addresses the real problem that the Border Patrol is experiencing right now, which isn't Mexicans trying to sneak in, but Central Americans wanting asylum. New figures from the Center for Immigration Study, Jessica Vaughn, shows that the U.S. resettled 59,000 children from Central America this fiscal year. That's up 25,000 from 2015. And just last week, the Border Patrol caught, on average, 247 unaccompanied children per day. That doesn't count families, which is about the same amount. So the point is that agents right now are saying, hey, these people should not be getting asylum, but under President Obama, they're getting a court date for which 51% of the children, 84% of the families don't show up to court. Tucker?
Amazing. The talking point you keep hearing is that net migration is going back to Mexico, but you're saying really the problem is from Central America.
Yeah, about, I think it was 177,000 were caught from Mexico last year. The real problem are these Central Americans, which is costing, we'll go 2 years ago, only 64 kids a day were being caught, and now you're up to 250. That's almost a five-fold increase. So that's the problem. So the question is, what do you do with them? That's expensive. It's about $3 billion DHS is asking for next year just for the unaccompanied children. Tucker?
Amazing. Totally changing this country, too. William, thanks a lot for that. We appreciate interesting numbers. One of the most anticipated dinners of the year is now underway. You were not invited, unfortunately. Sorry about that. President-elect Donald Trump and former Governor Mitt Romney are sitting down to eat in New York City. The pair is being joined by their wives, Melania Trump and Ann Romney. They're dining at Jean Georges at the Trump International Hotel in Columbus Circle. The two feuded, of course, during the campaign intensely. But now that Governor Romney is one of the finalists for Secretary of State, this dinner could be seen as a rapprochement between the two, if I'm even pronouncing it correctly. Also today, Mr. Trump named Elaine Chao as Transportation of Health, and for Administrative Medicaid Services, he named Seema Verma. He's also expected to name financier Steve Mnuchin as Secretary of the Treasury. Well, the praise for totalitarian lunatic Fidel Castro has not ebbed since he descended into the hot place for eternity last Friday. Nobody loves Fidel more than liberal journalists. Next up, we'll send Geraldo Rivera to our own re-education camp. If we can get him straightened out, we're going to do our best. It's time now for the Friend Zone, where we invite one of our friends, even our misguided friends, within the building here at Fox, onto the show. Tonight we're joined by our old pal, Fox's roaming correspondent, Geraldo Rivera. And Geraldo, taking a page out of Fidel's book, we've been monitoring your social media, and we noticed the other night that you had nice words to say about Comandante Castro, and it raised the question in my mind, what is it about this guy that so excites liberal journalists? It's not his policies. They failed, obviously. He was a totalitarian who didn't have a free press, so it can't be that. There was something irresistible about the guy to liberal intellectuals and journalists. What is that?
Well, I'm not sure that I characterize myself as a liberal intellectual. Like maybe a moderate intellectual. I'll take that. And I do definitely consider you a friend. You know, I think that Castro was one of the most charismatic figures I ever met in my 47-year career. He emanated a kind of authority. He was very colorful, humorous. I know all of the backstory, and I know how outraged so many people are that I take a nuanced view of this man. But I think he's one of the most iconic figures of the second half of the 20th century. And more than that, you know, you say he had failed policies. I guess you could say he had failed policies, although literacy and health in Cuba is better than anywhere else in the developing world. And he survived for 11 American administrations. You know, he thumbed his nose at the great Colossus.
I get it, the great Satan. But can we be honest? If he was 5 feet tall, weighed 300 pounds, and had a cleft palate, nobody would be sticking up for him. I mean, a lot of people with daddy issues looked at him and are like, oh, you're so great because you're so handsome. I mean, that was part of it, no?
I think rock star than daddy.
Right, okay, whatever. I'm not a shrink, but that was his appearance was part of it.
But, you know, why is it? And you know, going back to this philosophical, ideological divide, why is it that conservatives are okay with China, okay with doing business with Vietnam, where 50,000 GIs perished. Okay, we're doing business with Serbia, with Tin Pot dictator, except just don't get this selective
That's
outrage.
a fair question, but here's the difference. It's one thing to, you know, you got to do business with the Saudis because they control the price of oil, because they get the biggest excess supply. But nobody says, you know what, those Saudi, I want my son to grow up to be like a Saudi sheikh. You know what I mean? Like surrounded by hookers in Dubai. Nobody here hero worships the Saudi royal family or the Chinese government. They hero worship Fidel in this kind of creepy way. No.
Well, you know, look at, I think that historically he is the most significant figure. Simón Bolívar in the beginning of the 18th century. You know, he was someone who embodied a sense of dignity and equality for the Latin people vis-a-vis in the Western world. Even Miami, some of the exiles in Miami are celebrating the death of Fidel. But in Havana and through much of Latin America, indeed through much of the developing world, his passing is a sad. It's a tragic event. Oh, he's 90 years old and he was sick for a long time.
Let's be totally honest. In a police state, can you really take people at their word? People wept for others are worried about. Can you opinion in a totalitarian state? Isn't it naive to say the people of Cuba feel any way at all? We have no idea because they go to jail if they express views contrary to the government.
Well,
right?
I think that you give their secret police too high a grade in terms of their efficiency. There are hundreds, literally hundreds of thousands of people night and day in the streets of Havana, even as we speak. You know, far more than the organized outside world, the people of Cuba are truly mourning, it seems to me. I'm not there right now. The passing of this figure. Now, I also think, let me just hasten to add, I also think the Cubans are ready, willing, and eager to go from Fidel to an embrace of the United States. That is, you know, Cubans love America. I think all we need to do is get cell phones there, more cruise ships there, commercial airlines have started now flying there. I think in 10 minutes, Cuba's going to be totally in the American sphere of influence.
May I ask you one question, though? As a journalist, you spent these many decades, probably close to 5, as a journalist, and the currency in your world, in your life, is freedom of expression. How can you get past the fact that Fidel didn't allow a free press or any criticism of him, a cult of personality that's antithetical to journalism? How can you get past that?
How does Donald Trump get past it with Vladimir Putin? I mean, let's be fair.
Trump's not a journalist. He's like a developer or something, but we're journalists.
He's the president-elect of the United States of America. I think that, you know, Fidel, how do I get past it? I mean, that is a fair question. I think that you've got to spell out all the things that Fidel Castro did that are horrible, depriving people of property, property and the political opponents that he assassinated and so forth. There's blood on his hands clearly, but there's blood on a lot of hands on a lot of people that the United States does business with.
It's about controlling people's minds. Lots of governments kill people, and it's always wrong, but it's very common. But controlling what people think is the worst sin of all, isn't it? And it's a sin that affects us directly. We're the people who say what we think. We're journalists.
I get that embrace of the Constitution and free speech, but I find it ironic that you say how Fidel quashed free speech, and yet you want to jail people that burn the American flag in contravention of the Constitution.
I'm certainly not for that. I'm for people saying what they think, no matter how unpopular.
Well, I think that when I've been with rock stars, all the Rolling Stones, the Beatles. I've been with, Yasser Arafat and Charles Manson and, every dictator in general, from Southeast Asia to the tip of Latin America. There are people that you connect with in a way, in an interpersonal way that has nothing really to do with the outside world. You either like them, like I like you. I really like you. You and I come from different sides of the street. We probably agree on a couple of things in the middle there, and yet I find you engaging in many ways. I find you refreshing in many ways.
So
I come to bury Castro, not to praise him tonight.
But I hope you'll come back tomorrow night and tell us what a great guy Charles Manson is.